Today I want to talk about Locke. Avery's already given us a pretty good introduction, so I'm just going to be filling in a little bit of footnote information to his presentation. But these are things that I think you should be aware of. He covered all of this, so just let me highlight some of the historical talking points connected with Locke. I'm not going to discuss these. I just want to make sure that you make the connection. You think of Locke in connection politically with probably his most famous single notion. It's not exclusively his, but you would think Locke is best known for what's called the, in political terms. Everybody know I'm just really out of the blue, but do you have any idea what I'm after here? What are you guys doing? What is this?
Sorry.
Yeah. Does anybody know? What is it? It is the, go ahead, Avery. Well, that'd be high on the list. That could be a right answer, is not what I'm thinking of. The social contract. He's a social contract guy. As over against absolute monarchy. Those are the two great theories of government in history. Some kind of social contract or some kind of absolute monarchy. You know, Hobbes versus Locke. So that's one point. Of course, other people had social contract. Even Hobbes advocated a sort of social contract. It looked a lot different. Rousseau had a social contract, but Locke is the one who's usually credited with what's called, in the classical sense of the term, a liberal social contract. I don't mean liberal the way the term is used today. I mean the way it's used traditionally, which is a quite different idea. Secondly, he is an empiricist. So we've talked about Descartes and this whole rationalist tradition. And now we're looking at the other side of the ledger. It begins with Locke, and this would be called the empiricist tradition. These two are at odds with each other. And this is the same debate we've seen before. Who are the earliest names that we highlighted in this class that represent the great conflict between rationalism and empiricism? Going way back to the beginning is one of the first things we talked about. And Jacob, the names would be?
Plato and Aristotle.
Plato and Aristotle certainly count, but I'm thinking even earlier than those two. You're right. Plato would be on which side of the ledger, Jacob? We put Plato where? Which side?
Rationalism.
That's right. Aristotle goes over here. Even before them, Nicole, we talked about who? Okay, Pythagoras. Where would he go? Is he a rationalist or an empiricist? Rationalist, certainly, but kind of in the same time frame. Kayla?
Is it Heraclitus of Parmenides?
Okay, yes. Somebody's paying attention. Thank you, Kayla. Yes, that's right. So Parmenides, Heraclitus would be the classic formulation of this hostile philosophical relationship. Where do you go to get truth? Do I go outside myself into the world that I'm perceiving? Or do I go inside myself to a world I am conceiving? Where is it? Where is truth? And that debate is with us to this day. And you may recall, as we were kind of marching through these things, I gave you what I think is the correct answer in what I called the Christian synthesis. Remember that? You can all explain that on a final exam, right? Because I am going to ask you that, believe me. That's what I want you to walk away with. Okay, so it's the same debate. Descartes is in that tradition of Parmenides, of Plato, of Augustine, the rationalists, and Salm, so on down through history. Descartes is simply the most recent expression of that we've seen so far. Locke would be on the other side. I also mentioned to you that with Descartes you usually will include the names of Leibniz and Spinoza. You should know those names. I know I haven't given you anything or much about them. I'm sorry for that. It's just a timing issue. But please have the names associated with that. The names over here would first of all be Locke, then blank, and then blank. Anybody fill in the blanks? Who comes after Locke in the British Empiricist tradition that is answering the French rationalist tradition. It'd be Locke first, and then, anybody know? Any thoughts? Any takers? I'm not sure you know this, Laura. Hume comes, he's third. Anybody know the guy in the middle? Do you know? Trevor, did you pick up the guy in the middle here? No one? Okay, his name is Berkeley. It looks like Berkeley. And in fact, Berkeley University was named for Berkeley. But you always prove that you've taken philosophy if you just casually pronounce his name correctly. It's like you prove you've studied theology if you don't say Karl Barth. It's Barth. And it's not Berkeley, it's Barclay. So just make that note to self. Any college professor, if you just casually raise your hand and find some excuse to mention William Barclay in class, and he catches that you said the name correctly, and you actually said something correct about him, the college prof is going to go, note to self, kid went to a good high school. So anyway, we will look at these. We'll look at these guys later. But that's the second thing about Locke. He's an empiricist. Third, he's probably the single most important philosopher to the founding fathers of America. Locke was a huge influence during the founding era. He precedes it, of course, but he was by far the most influential philosopher. Political philosopher. So those are kind of the basic talking points. Avery did a great job of covering his connections to Shaftesbury and all of that. I won't cover all of that. That's stuff you at least have it somewhere in your notes. What I'd like to do is actually look at the fundamentals of his thought at this point. Again, in connection with Locke, the principal work that really spells out his thought is entitled An Essay Concerning Human Understanding. So please know that. The principal writing that sets forth his empiricism is called An Essay Concerning Human Understanding. It is written in several books. The books are simply extended chapters. They're not separate volumes. Book 1, Book 2 is more something like Chapter 1, Chapter 2. Book 1 is an attack. Just as Descartes' first meditation was an attack. In the case of Descartes, he's attacking things we thought we could rely on for truth, right? Doubting everything. Locke is attacking a particular idea found in Descartes, and it's the idea called innate ideas. So he's attacking. What would be an innate, or what is the meaning of the term innate idea? Jordan, what do you think? If I said, do you believe in innate ideas? Number one, would you know what I'm talking about? And number two, would you say you do or don't?
I think I know what you're talking about, but is an innate idea, is that an idea that's been, that it's kind of a presupposition?
Sort of.
It's already been put in your brain, that it's just...
And it's put in your brain at what time? When would we find it in your brain?
Well,
If it's innate.
wouldn't it be all the time, but wouldn't it be put in there at birth?
Yes. Hence, innate, as in nativity, your birth. It's there from the beginning. Do you believe in innate ideas? Are you a Platonist? Or are you an Aristotelian?
I'm going to say that I do believe in innate ideas.
Sounds good to me. This is one of those questions that either way you answer it, you're probably going to be okay. You got some good people in your corner. All right. But and I'm not sure. Well, let's leave that for right now. In any event, Locke attacks it. Does Descartes believe in innate ideas, Spencer?
If Locke was attacking it, I'm pretty sure Descartes would believe in.
All right. And what sort of, what would be an example of innate ideas that we would find in Descartes that we've talked about thus far? What would be an innate idea in Descartes?
Let's see. Well, would the idea of the perfect being, would that be?
Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That was the best answer you could have given. That, we have an innate idea of God. And a lot of other stuff. I mean, Descartes would throw on the list, we have innate ideas of a perfect circle, we have innate ideas of beauty, we have innate ideas of all kinds of stuff. It's all there. He's a Platonist. Descartes is a Platonist. It's kind of a reiteration of new terms, but those are all innate ideas. Plato would say that, Descartes would say that. Locke would deny it. Locke says there are no innate ideas, and he attempts to demonstrate the absurdity of the notion of innate ideas, and he wants to say instead that we come into this world with what, Avery? A mind that is known as?
Tabula rasa.
Thank you. Tabula rasa, R-A-Z-A. Blank slate. Nothing there. No innate ideas. Experience will write ideas on that slate. There's nothing on it when you first come into the world. He also attacks the idea of the self. Now this is a little more subtle and slippery. But it is so important. I'm sure I am utterly inadequate to get over to you how important this is. But the question is, what is exactly the nature of the self? The self. Each of us in this room has a sense of self. I am aware of myself as a self, and there's a private part of me none of you can see or know. It is my personal, private knowledge of myself. Each of you has the same thing. And we all are aware of that intuitively, and then you have to ask the question, what is that? Well, for Descartes, it is something. It is that non-extended mind. But it has real sort of existence and in the non-extended aspect of reality. We talked about that yesterday, right? Locke denies that there is a self in that sense. He denies it. This is at the heart of his empiricism. He says, your sense of self is just your stream of perceptions. So the self, insofar as it exists at all, is just a stream of perception. Now think about that for a minute. Don't try to write this down, just try to get it in your head. We are all here experiencing, every one of us, a stream of perceptions. You have at least the 5 basic sensory faculties. As far as I know, they're all working fine. You are seeing things. You are hearing things. You are smelling things, hopefully pleasant things. You are maybe tasting things. Maybe as you were running into the room, almost late, almost tardy, you were throwing some, trail mix. And you still have a little bit of the peanuts and M&Ms taste in your mouth. I don't know. You are sensing pressure. You're sitting in chairs, and the chair, now you feel it because I just mentioned it. The pressure of the chair against your derriere is, you feel the clothing on your body. Because I've just called attention to it. You notice, you weren't thinking about it until I mentioned it, right? And all of a sudden you're thinking about it. You might rattle your head and kind of feel your hair flop around a little bit, depending on the length of your hair. And so on. In other words, you are something, and there's these filters, or these like little openings into your private self, where all these things are flowing in. Hearing, tasting, touching, feeling. It's flowing in. And all of that rolled together is creating what we call a stream of perception. All of these perceptions you're having. You don't focus on all of them at once. You can only focus really on about one at a time, really, But it's all happening all the time. Locke says it's that stream of perception, that razor edge going through time in which you are experiencing all these perceptions taken together like a kind of kaleidoscope. That is yourself. That is your sense of self. And he proves it by saying this. Imagine that all of those sensory experiences were removed. That all of a sudden you could not see, you could not hear. That in itself would radically alter. Radically alter your, then you have the, what's her name? The Helen Keller situation. Well, let's say we remove some other things. Let's say we remove your sense of touch, your sense of taste, your sense of feel. Could you say, if you took away all of those sensory stimuli, that there's actually a self left? Would you even have any awareness at all? You vacuum. See, that's his argument. You don't have to agree with that, but that's kind of the way he reasons. How much is your sense of self dependent on this stream of perceptions? Descartes famously says, this is, by the way, one of the more famous metaphors connected with Descartes. It's called the Dutch oven. Anybody know what a Dutch oven is? What is a Dutch oven? Krista, what is a Dutch oven?
It's a big pan or pot.
Mm-hmm. I always like it when my wife puts some stuff in the Dutch oven, because it kind of slow cooks, And you put on all this stuff at the beginning of the day, and it looks like you come up at the end of the day and you go, it just smells good, and it's just, it's like comfort food. It's so nice. Well, anyway, there's this Dutch oven idea connected with Descartes. I have just drawn one. That's the handle on the top. That is not a house, that is a Dutch oven. The kind of the theory with Descartes was this. You could put a person in a Dutch oven, alone with their own thoughts, and by the exercise of pure reason, this person could give you back all of what we conceive of as the external universe. Find God, find God's creation, etc. All inside that Dutch oven. That's Descartes' theory. You can do it all by pure reason. Locke says, right. Put somebody in a Dutch oven. Leave them there for 10 years. Come back and ask them what they thought of in 10 years, and you're going to find a person who is imbecilic beyond description. You can keep them alive, you can put needles in them and keep them alive, keep them breathing. But you put someone in a Dutch oven in the darkness there and leave them there for a while, you will basically rob them of any semblance of humanity that they may have ever had. Solitary confinement's bad enough, let alone a Dutch oven. It says self depends on perception. you've got to have stimulation. You've got to have a world around you that is writing on that tabula rasa, or else you are basically robbed of the very fundamental aspects of what we think of as being human. Do you follow that? You see that? That's the conflict. So, Locke wants to argue that our basis for knowledge, our epistemology, and so on, cannot proceed on this notion of innate ideas, that we have to indeed build the whole thing based on some notion of an external world that is writing on this tabula rasa. What's always struck me as interesting, and for this I'm going to give you one of my very few axioms that, as far as I know, is original with me in philosophy. There's very, very, very little I ever give you that's original with me. One that's original with me is credit cards are from hell. I said that before Dave Ramsey did, so I'll claim that one. But that's economics, that's a different class. But one that does apply to philosophy is this. In philosophical history, you'll find two kinds of philosophers, and in each case they have a problem. One class of philosophers starts with the mind and loses the world. The other class starts with the world and loses the mind. That's the problem they always run into. Descartes starts with the mind, but he cannot give us back the world. He winds up in those deep weeds of the point of interactionism and the pineal gland and all of this crap. You know, what is this about? Come on! He starts with the mind. He thinks he's going to give us some great epistemological breakthrough, and he just leaves us in a very lonely place of the mind. Well, Locke comes along, and so he says, okay, Descartes, I can see your problem. I'm going to start where I know we've got something we're going to rely on. I'm going to start with the world. But ultimately, if he's consistent, he cannot give us back the mind. The mind simply becomes a stream of consciousness. And we're going to see that again and again. Kant will take the best run at trying to fix that problem, but it still remains. Start with the mind, lose the world. Start with the world, lose your mind. All right, so that's book one. Basically, book one is this attack on innate ideas and the attack on the self. Book two is Locke's now attempt to construct a theory of knowledge. So you might say this is his, at least beginnings of his epistemology. So that's what we'll call it, his epistemology. I'll abbreviate it, what I'm talking about. And the first notion that he gives us in this discussion of epistemology is what he calls the idea. The idea. He says we do have ideas in our minds, but those ideas are utterly dependent on something external that creates them. So here I am. Here's a mind. Okay, so there's the mind. I look out here and I see a tree. The tree is really out there. I didn't just project it, imagine it. It's out there. It is a lively thing in the sense that it is producing its own stimulation. The tree impacts, which is bad, by the way. Impact is not a verb yet in the English language, so I should not use it that way. It is a noun. You commonly hear it used as a verb, and it can morph into a verb. But for those who are concerned about the purity language, nothing impacts anything. Things have an impact. So I violated my own rule there. So the tree has an impact on my sense of sight. And it generates inside a little replica of the tree. And that is what he calls an idea. Simple enough? So, some people say that Locke is like the common sense philosopher, and in many ways he is. In fact, I heard one philosophy prof put it this way: Locke is the philosopher of the college freshman. Because he simply tells us what we've always thought things were. He doesn't say anything that surprises us. We've always thought we saw a tree, and then we have an idea in our head of that tree. So at that point, he's not saying anything that shocks us. The reality of the tree is outside the mind. The image of the tree is inside the mind. And that is the idea. Now he says these ideas have two qualities: primary and secondary. And again, I think this is also the way people casually think about perception, think about what's going on. Primary qualities are qualities that are inherent in the thing being seen. Secondary qualities are qualities that are dependent on the perceiver. Example. Do I have an example? We'll use the example of the eraser. Here I have an eraser. Yes, Spencer.
Could you repeat what primary was?
Yes, I will. Here it is again. Primary qualities are qualities that are inherent in the object itself. They do not depend on the perceiver. Secondary qualities are dependent on the perceiver. Okay, here's an example. I got an eraser in my hand. Stephen, can you see it from there? Got it? Now, based on Locke's distinction, would the shape of this eraser, the shape of it, be a primary quality or a secondary quality?
It would be primary.
Primary. And why would you say that?
So everybody would, well, I guess it depends on what exactly you can call that shape, but the shape isn't different depending on who's looking at it.
All right. It seems to be inherent. Ben, the weight of this object, do you think its weight would be a primary or secondary quality? Its weight.
Well, it would be primary. Who's looking at it, it's going to weigh the same.
Weighs the same
I
thing.
think it's weighs something different, but it's still
Sure.
the same.
We might have different. If somebody is very, very muscular, they might think this doesn't weigh much. If it's a wimp, they might think, this thing's very heavy. All right. Matthew, the color. Kind of a black or sort of purplish color there on one side, but is the color of this thing a primary or secondary quality, you think, according to Locke?
I think you. Right.
All right, and why would you say that? That's true. That's true. But don't get that kind of esoteric about it. I just mean the color of the thing. It's sort of black. Would the color of this be a primary or secondary quality, aside from color blindness or other impairments? Primary. Does everybody agree with that? Anybody disagree with that? Avery disagrees. Go ahead, Avery.
Because color like, objects don't actually have color.
That's right.
That we can prove.
That's right.
So,
What is the color of that? What is creating the impression of the blackness of this thing?
the absence of color.
That's right, in this case.
So that depends on perception.
That's right.
So I would say it's secondary.
It's secondary. Well, it might be easier if I use this, let's say the green cap. Sorry, Matt, it was I kind of set you up for it, but the green cap. Is that cap, don't get violent, it's okay. Little playground fun here. The green cap. Is that cap green? Answer, no. That cap is colorless as far as we know. What's happening is light is coming out of the light bulbs, and in fact, some of the light is being absorbed and some of the light is being reflected. You all understand that, don't you, from physics or something you took one with? And so a certain frequency of electromagnetic radiation is bouncing off this thing, and it happens to be that band, that frequency band, that creates in your perception a sense of green. It's a different, excuse me, Jacob, mind me just one. It's a different frequency from the orange, which is produced by the reflection of light off of this. You all understand that, don't you? Color is just what your eye is receiving in terms of frequency of light, and we don't know what the color of that thing is. In fact, fundamentally, we live in a colorless world. Because all that's happening is light is bouncing off of things at various frequencies and creating impressions of color. If, for example, all the light in the world were one narrow frequency, you follow me? If all the light in the world, it was not white light, let's say it was all kind of a dark red frequency, and that's the only light in the world, then would things still have the same colors? No. In fact, things would basically be colorless, because there'd only be one color out there. You see that? You ever thought about that? It makes the world kind of a different place than you were thinking, doesn't it? Because we think of all this stuff as sort of being, blue shirt, blue tie, gray hair. And Locke says, no, that's secondary. How about the taste of something? Sit down and have some Jimmy Dean sausage. Sounds good. Jimmy Dean sausage. Sarah, primary or secondary?
Is it secondary because how we taste it, we either like it or not? Or?
Well, it's not even a matter of whether you like it or not. It's just that, can you say anything has taste until it has been tasted? You see, taste is something that depends on the taster, right, to have any meaning at all. So Locke has this working distinction. He says if we look at any given object, that some of the aspects of that object are going to be primary, they're going to be intrinsic, like he would say the shape of this, the weight of this, and so on. Those are all primary. But when it comes to its color, its smell, class dismissed. Oh no, sorry. Smell, taste, whatever it takes, Those are all secondary, because if there were no perceiver, then those qualities would not exist. Taste wouldn't exist. It's a little bit of the old question: if a tree falls in the forest, was there any sound? Locke's answer is what? Joe, what do you think? Locke would say if a tree falls in the forest and there's nobody there to hear the sound, was there any sound?
I think he would say that you can't know unless
No, he wouldn't say that. He would have a more definitive answer than that. Based on what we've said so far, Jordan, his answer would be what? Yes or no? Was there sound?
No.
No, there is silent. The forest is silent. Unless there's somebody there to hear it. Yeah.
Wouldn't that also mean that unless there's an eye to see it happen, it didn't happen?
Well, he would say that a tree may be in the forest and a tree may fall, and that may happen as a matter of objective reality, but that doesn't depend on a perceiver. But the sound, you see, there's no sound unless there's a hearer. I can't think of other, it doesn't have a aroma necessarily, but you see the difference. He would say there could be a tree of a certain mass that falls over and so on, but unless there's something there to hear it, it's all silent. I'm saying you have to agree with that. I'm just saying that's kind of the way he approaches it, yeah.
What if someone who is deaf is
Yeah, if the person is there and they're deaf, then again there's no sound.
They can feel it, the sound's away.
Yeah,
So there's still,
they would feel, well, you're saying they feel the vibration in the air?
yeah.
Yeah, sure. And the vibration in the air is not sound. That's what he would say. You know, sound is a subjective experience. Vibration in the air doesn't have sound. It's just a physical, you know. I can do this, and if we had ears to hear it, we could hear the sound of it. It's a very low frequency, but I'm creating sound. We can't hear it. So he would say there is no sound, really, but there is vibration. Yeah, you just have to kind of play with it. Go ahead.
So if there's a mechanism that can gauge sound,
Mhm.
can that, like if that mechanism is sitting in the forest and the
Mhm.
tree falls,
Yeah.
does the tree make a sound at that point?
The mechanism, like a microphone recording it or something like that, I think, of course, Locke didn't have any idea of microphones or recording equipment, but I think Locke's response would be that unless there is a person, that there is no sound. Now, I may listen to the recording later and hear a sound generated by the recording, you know, but that is different than what was happening in the forest, that the forest was still. It's an interesting problem. If Locke were here, how he would defend himself on that, I'm not sure. But he is pretty strongly committed to the idea that there are certain qualities that do not even have any meaning except for the fact that there is someone to perceive them. That's what's important. I want you to get this. I realize this may seem like a kind of arcane point to be puzzling over, but notice the subtle shift. Locke is making, in a sense, reality depend on perception, at least to some degree. It's the first step. I don't want to call Locke a bad guy, I kind of like him. But it is the first step toward a kind of subjectivism of truth. So it's a baby step, but it is a step. Truth depends on the perceiver. All right, I want to hold up pressing this point further, and just say a couple of sort of somewhat unrelated ideas about Locke, just to round out our conversation. Tomorrow we're going to come back and talk about Berkeley, because he takes the next logical step beyond Locke. Kind of takes Locke where Locke didn't want to go, to a very strange place, but we'll save that for tomorrow. But Locke is also famous, and somebody said this earlier, maybe I think it was Avery, when I asked what was one of his great contributions to the term natural law. Remember that? And you should identify that with Locke. Locke was a great champion of the idea that as we perceive this world around us, we don't simply perceive raw sensory experience, but we perceive order in it. When I look at this tree, I see the tree in a context of order. There's a rationality about what I'm seeing. The ideas generated in my mind are being reflective of an objective orderliness about things, and that orderliness is not simply an order connected with physical laws, gravity, that kind of thing, but that there's a kind of orderliness about things morally, so that this universe around us has a kind of natural law. And he does a little bit with that. He presses that point to some degree, that this orderliness of life around us, whether it's physical order or moral order, can be perceived. As we reflect on things around us, we perceive that order. We don't impose it. This is not some kind of imposition of the mind. We discover it. And he would say that order is put there by God. Yeah.
Going back to social contract.
Yeah.
Other people had thought of the idea of the social contract.
Right.
So what makes Locke's idea so profound?
Locke's social contract reserved, you might say, a right of revocation. Hobbes did not. Hobbes said, I make a social contract by which I create Leviathan, and there's no turning back. Once you create that absolute power, you don't go and say, oh, just kidding, sorry. Once it's done, it's done. Locke always reserves within his social contract theory that the entire contract is subject to natural law, which is really the point here. So we may, by social contract, decide we're going to make Spencer king. Don't know why we do that, but hey, we can do that. But of course, implicit in our social contract is Spencer can be the king, and we will respect him as such, so long as he doesn't become illegal. He doesn't start violating the laws that God has put in place. And if he does, we reserve the right to revoke his appointment as king. A right of revolution. I would say probably that's the most, it's the whole idea of a higher law under which the social contract operates that's unique. You don't find that in Hobbes. You don't find But this notion of natural law then became quite important, very influential. And so who are some of the people that took that ball and ran with it? Who are some of the other people that took the notion of natural law that they got from Locke and sort of applied it big time in various disciplines that were interesting to them? You know what I'm asking? Who took the notion of natural law and applied it to the world of economics, for example? His name was? Sydney? Adam Smith. So Adam Smith is following Locke. Who took Locke's idea of natural law and applied it in the world of jurisprudence? He's a contemporary roughly contemporary of Adam Smith. His name is William Blackstone. Who took the idea of natural law and applied it in the world of political theory? Answer is Medica. How about Montesquieu? You ever heard of Montesquieu? These are all Lockean philosophers. They all go back to Locke for their basic idea, but then they take this notion and apply it in particular disciplines. Locke had a huge effect, in other words, on subsequent thought, partly because of this natural law idea. All right, we will stop right there.